bottom of the stack, and I pulled it out, and unlike the other books that shouted, this book whispered, and it seemed to be what I was looking for. It was an example of something that had the integrity of a piece of sculpture, and it gave me the kind of I don't know, belief or enthusiasm that yes, you can make a picture book for kids, and it can have the integrity of a piece of art like sculpture. And that little book was Higgledy Piggledy Pop by Maurice Sendak. And that book was an inspiration to me, not directly in the sense that I wanted to make something like it, but it was an inspiration because it made me understand that I could make a picture book and it could be a piece of art. It couldn't be something that was calculated to appeal to a child. So I did some drawings, and my wife, ever eager to promote my work, offered to take some of these drawings that I had done to publishers, and I said, okay, well, I guess that would be all right. I'm not sure what the result will be. I can't imagine any publishers, given the things I've seen, with the exception of one little book, would be interested in these black and white pictures that I was doing. And so my wife went off, and she went to a publisher in Boston, she went to some in New York, and she returned and she said, you know, you'll be surprised, they actually kind of like it. And I was surprised. And she said, then, you know, the person who showed the most interest in it, seemed to have the strongest response, was an editor up in Boston named Walter Lorraine, who was at Houghton Mifflin Company. And the result of those visits was that I got some manuscripts from Houghton Mifflin Company, and I wasn't moved by them. I wasn't inspired by them, and I shared this with my wife, and then ultimately I shared it with Walter Lorraine. I met him on the phone, and then I finally went up to Boston, and we spoke. He said, which was it seemed like a crazy idea to me, almost as crazy as my wife's belief that the pictures I made were like book illustration, but Walter suggested, well, if you don't like these stories, write your own. And I said, well, I've never done that. And in the 20 years leading up to that, the longest thing I'd probably written was a postcard. But I gave it a try, and ended up writing a book that started out with the idea about a lost dog in a topiary garden and became a story about magic and illusion. And I presented this to Houghton Mifflin, pretty much done. And I thought maybe I would get in trouble because I wasn't conferring with my editor frequently enough. And I was very pleasantly surprised that Walter Lorraine actually thought about books as, in the same way that I thought about them, that they could be genuine artistic expressions, and the idea that I hadn't collaborated with people who were trying to determine the age group for the book, or trying to suggest that maybe the book was not appropriate for kids. That never entered into our relationship, and I discovered that over the years that I was very lucky to have him as an editor, because he felt the same way I felt, which was that it's possible to sit down with an idea about a story and to make the pictures for it. And I don't want this to sound the right way, not to think about who's going to read it, not to think about children, not to think about book reviewers, not to think about librarians, to make a thing that you feel is all yours. And Walter always supported that idea, and I was lucky to have him as an editor, because over the years, I brought in some really harebrained ideas. I mean, I brought in an alphabet book that's a drama of sadism, where terrible things happen to letters. I brought in books that essentially didn't have endings. They only ended with a question. And I always had his support, and I always had his support as an illustrator as well. So I guess I'll just say I'm very thankful to my wife for having encouraged me to think of my hobby more seriously. Very grateful for having run into Maurice's little Higgledy Piggledy Pop. Very lucky and fortunate for having had Walter Lorraine as my editor for so many years. And